to Muzāraʿah, Musāqāh wal-Muzāraʿah. So the irrigation of water or the watering of the crops, as well as Muzāraʿah, yani the plantation or the vegetation that comes from that. And this essentially is a continuation from the chapter that we discussed last week, which was the chapter referring to the sharika, where two parties work together in order to conclude a business transaction. And essentially where they differ, or where you find the different types of sharika, is dependent upon what is the contribution of each party. So you may find that the contribution of each of the parties is, for example, they both put in capitals, they both put in money, and this is their contribution. Or they both put in money and labor, or one party puts in money, one party puts in labor, all dependent. Naam. And so this now is a continuation of that, referring to the Musāqāh wal Muzāraʿah. And so as for the Musāqāh, this is referring to the giving of the particular plants or trees which bring about fruit and the fruition that can be eaten. So one gives something from fruit to the other, or to the plants that produce fruit from one party to another. Naam. And they agree upon a particular amount in the juz' ma'lum. So for example, one person says that from whatever fruits come from these plants, or from whatever fruits come from these trees on this land, then you take an X amount of that of the fruit that comes from it. Naam. And as for the Muzāraʿah, then this is in relation to the earth itself, to the land itself. So that then the person gives a portion of the land to the individual to work upon, and whatever comes from that portion of the land, then he takes from whatever is in that portion. Naam. And so they agree upon that. And so the Muzāraʿah is more focused upon the land and the seeds that are sown, whilst the Musāqāh is in relation to the fruits, the fruition of those trees and plants. Barakallahu feekum. And now, the author mentions, raḥimahullāh, تجوز المصاقة في كل شجر له ثمر بجزء من ثمره مصاع or مشاع معلوم. And so this Musāqāh is permissible in every plant or tree where it produces fruit. Now, where it produces fruit. So here, for what is mentioned, when it mentions fruit, it doesn't necessarily mean the term fruit itself, but it has a produce that can be taken and used to benefit from. Now, it produces something that can be taken and benefited from. And they agree upon a specific amount. So they agree upon a specific amount. And this specific amount, it can be nisbi, mentioned by al-Bassām, Shaykh al-Bassām, raḥimahullah. It's something which is relevant or relative. So it's relative. The amount is relative based upon what they agree. So they can say, for example, that your job, or you have been tasked with watering all of these plants, and then you take from whatever comes from the fruits of those plants or the fruits of those trees, you take a third. Now this is the amount which is ma'lum, because now it has a specified portion. Barakallahu feekum. Is that clear? So you've tasked that individual with doing the job of watering. So they've tasked him with the labor, and as part of the reward essentially that they receive from that, And how they're compensated for that is that they take a specified amount, which is nisbi. Naam, something which is relative to the amount that has been brought about from fruition. Can it be said that you take a specific amount in terms of pay? Question clear? So now you've been tasked with the watering. Can you now say that instead of giving you a portion, like for as you mentioned, a third of whatever the fruition comes from it, rather you take X amount of dirham, for example, instead?
Wouldn't that be like normal ijab?
That'd be normal.
Normal wages.
Ijab, man, wages, ratib. So you can do that. When is it not permissible then to have a specified amount? We mentioned this last week. In what circumstance can you not specify an amount? Does the question make sense? When the been agreed. Say they don't agree with percentages.
Okay, so the question again.
So in what circumstance can you not specify an amount? Here, the first example we just mentioned, where the person, for example, he's watering the plants, the trees, and he takes a specific amount for that. That essentially is him taking a ratib, taking a wage. That's fine. In what circumstance can you not specify an amount where he says, I'm going to take this amount? Within the same contract?
One contract and then separate.
But what's the sort of, how does that contract look? To the extent where you cannot now say, I'm specifying this amount.
If you put money into it.
Now, if he's invested capital into it now. So he's invested capital into it, and then what?
And then you get a set amount every month, regardless how much.
Now, so he's invested capital into this particular venture, and then he says, no matter what happens, I'm taking 1,000 dinars, whether we make a profit or loss. No, you can't specify. This is when you can't specify the amount. So you've invested the capital. So now you are invested in whatever is the ribh. Naam. So whatever is the profit or whatever is the loss as well. Then he can have a separate. Naam. So he can have a separate contract if that separate contract means he's looking after that venture. But it can't be. So it's what you can't have though is within the initial contract. You say it's conditional that you hire me. Because now, if you have a condition within that contract that you hire me, whilst I've invested in it, now you've entered into two contracts within one. Now, does that make sense? So if now, for example, you just hired a person to as we have here, we're discussing here, you've hired him to water. All his job is to water the plants. Then that's one contract. That's fine. If now you've both invested in the land, for example, you both invested to buy the land, but within that contract you have with one another, he stipulates that you will have to hire me to water the land and hire me and give me a wage for it. That now is two contracts within one. Now, and this is not permissible. But as what is mentioned here, this is referring to essentially making an agreement with someone that they can take a portion of that land or a portion of the fruition of that land and benefit from it. Now take it from what they benefited from. Now, and so after that, the author raḥimahullāh mentions سواء كان البذر منهما أو من أحدهما. So this is irrespective of whether the initial seeds that are used to plant is from the two of them or one of the two. From the two of them or one of the two. And so al-Bassām, raḥimahullah, he mentions that in relation to this matter of supplying the seeds that need to be sown for this particular action, then he mentions there's ikhtilaf. There is difference of opinion, and he says some mention there's the ishtirat, that it is conditional, that this is supplied by the Rabb al-Ard. Rabb al-Ard. Rabb al-Ard referring to who, barakallahu fikum? The owner. Rabb al-Ard. Naam. And so some mention that it's a condition, and others mention no, it's not a condition. From the speech of Imam Ahmad, raḥimahullāh, he said it is conditional. That is conditional that you provide the seeds in order to plant upon that land. Now, it's conditional that this is done. And some mention that it's yujuz for the amil, the worker, to seek out the seeds himself. Naam, to seek out the seeds himself. And this is actually in the riwayah that is mentioned from Imam Ahmad also. Allah Ta'ala knows best. The proof for this particular action, or al-Musāqāh, or al-Muzāraʿah, is based upon the hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, where he mentions عامر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أهل خيبر بشطر ما يخرج منها من زرع وثمر. And so he mentions that the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم had the dealing with the people of Khaybar in relation to the earth and the farming, and it was based upon that which came out, exits from the earth, that which is from the fruits of that earth, and its seeds that are sown, or that which is brought forth from its amwal, from the wealth of the earth. Of course, with the wealth of the earth referring to the harvest. And so the amil, he's allowed to continue to do the action لَمَا جَرَتْ مِنْ عَادَتِهِ, that which is from his aada, that which he knows to generally do from his general actions. So again, if it goes back to the aada of an individual, so it goes back to the custom of an individual, or the custom that is understood, then the person can act in accordance with that and does not need to seek the permission. And we mentioned this particular matter before. Where? Do you remember? We mentioned this matter before. Tawakkul, naam, wakala. The wakil. And the wakil, how does this occur? Or what was the relationship between what we just mentioned? Naam. So it's something that is understood that you do. You don't have to seek permission every single time you do it. Why? Because it's become an aada, and this is one which is more specific, where it's the aada between the two of you. So it's a general custom between the two of you. So, for example, it's understood that you, on his behalf, you buy a commodity every single Monday, for example. You buy that commodity, you sell it throughout that week, right? It's understood you do that. It doesn't now mean that every Monday you have to go to him and ask him to seek his permission. Why? Because it's understood to be a mu'amala between the two of you. Or you have the more general aada, the more general custom, which would be what? Barakallahu fikum. So what the custom in a more general sense. No, something that is understood to be done in a particular place or particular land, then this is acceptable as well. Finally, the author, he mentions, وَلَوْ دَفَعَ إِلَى رَجُلٍ دَابَةً يَأْمَلُ عَلَيْهَا وَمَا حَصَلَ بَيْنَهُمَا جَازَ عَلَى قِيَاسِ ذَلِكَ. And so, if now the person, the owner of the land, was to give this individual that's working on that land the riding beast. So it's to give him the riding beast in order for him to work on that land. Then this is also permissible based upon the qiyas. So this is permissible based upon the same understanding from this particular ruling, the ruling of giving a piece of land to the individual. So if you give the piece of land to the individual and he takes whatever he benefits from, you can also give him the riding beast that aids him in that work. And that as well is also permissible, barakallahu feekum. That is also permissible in that regard. And so this is what we want to mention. It's a very short chapter in relation to that. We have our next chapter, which is the Bāb Iḥyāʻ al-Mawāt. Bāb Iḥyāʻ al-Mawāt. And this is the chapter pertaining to the revival of the barren land. Reviving the barren land. And the author, raḥimahullāh, he mentions وهي الأرض الدائرة التي لا يعرف لها مالك. So it's the barren land in which, for example, sand has covered it, it's been covered, and it's understood that there's no owner of that particular land. So that land does not have a owner. Abdullah ibn Bassām, Shaykh Abdullah ibn Bassām, raḥimahullah, he mentions that this type of land is of two types. So this form of land is of two types. أحدهما, so the first of them, or one of them, is where you have the land and there is no owner for it. It's understood that there's no one owns it. And so whoever then revives that land, he is regarded as being its owner. And this is based on a hadith which Ibn Qudāmah also mentioned. And this hadith of Jābir ibn Abdullah, where he mentions that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam stated, "Man ahya arda maytata fahiya lahu." So whoever revives a barren land, then it is for him, it belongs to him. Two questions not really related. First and foremost, this is a hadith which is found in Sunan al-Tirmidhī. And Tirmidhī mentions it's a hadith ḥasan ṣaḥīḥ. Two questions that are not really related to the topic per se. The narration mentions man ahya ardan maytata wa ta marbuta. Why? Question in terms of language. The word ard is feminine. The word ard is feminine. The word ard is from the words essentially where they are feminine, or there's a group of words that are feminine words, but there's no real sign that is feminine. Now, how do you know a word is feminine, generally speaking? Barakallahu feekum. Anyone know? So it ends with a ta marbuta, for example. What else? Alif maksura. Naam, could say alif maksura. What else? Alif and Hamza. If it's an explanation now, or if it's a description, like hamra'u. Body parts that come in pairs. Anything else? letters. So anytime he's speaking about a specific letter, that word is feminine. So for example, هذه ألف. This is an alif. Naam. Words that specifically refer to females. Ukhtun. Naam. Hamilun, for example, as well. Hamilun meaning pregnant. Then you have words, as we mentioned, that are not feminine, or that don't have any signs, sorry. There's no indication that they're feminine, but they are feminine. For example, as the word we have here, al-ard, the earth, the land. Or ash-shams, the sun. Or al-harb, war. Or al-bi'r, well. These are words, examples of words that are feminine without any sign. Ala kullin, second question, again, not related to the ahkam in this particular chapter, but it's a question that we ask many times, so we should have the answer, bi'idhnillah, that the hadith is found in Sunan al-Tirmidhī, and Tirmidhī mentions the hadith is ḥasan and ṣaḥīḥ. What does that indicate regarding the Sunan al-Tirmidhī? Question clear? Should be. I've asked it a million times this time. Wallah. Tirmidhī says ḥasan ṣaḥīḥ. What does that tell us about the book itself? That it? It can contain da'if narrations, and then what would that mean? If Tirmidhī himself is saying this ḥasan ṣaḥīḥ now, that's the answer to my next question, the follow-up question. What about this, where he's made the hukm on the hadith though? He's mentioned that the hukm of the hadith himself. Because when we say ḥasan ṣaḥīḥ, this is the speech of Tirmidhī. Is that clear? What's significant about that? What is significant about that? Tirmidhī saying ḥasan ṣaḥīḥ. Bukhari, for example, what was his intention in the gathering narrations? What was his intention? To gather narrations that are all sahih. His intent was to gather all narrations that are sahih. Bukhari. Likewise, Imam Muslim. Can the same be said about Tirmidhī? No, because he's mentioning himself the ruling on the hadith. So if now his intent was to gather only sahih narrations, he wouldn't now say, for example, this hadith is da'if, or this is hasan, this is sahih. Naam, for example, because his intent was not to gather narrations which was sahih. That wasn't his manhaj when gathering the narrations. What was his manhaj? Anyone know? What was his manhaj? So we know it wasn't to gather all narrations which was sahih. But what was the intent? As many narrations, but there was something specific though. If we say a book is from the Sunan, what is meant by that? Does anyone know? We say this is Sunan Abu Dawud, for example. Sunan Tirmidhī, Sunan Ibn Majah, Sunan Nasa'i. What's meant by the word Sunan? How is it ordered? No, it is. No, that's Musnad. It's ordered by way of the Abwāb al-Fiqhiyya. Now, so books of Sunan are ordered by Abwāb of Fiqh. So you have, for example, Kitab al-Tahara, Kitab al-Salah, for example. Now, Tirmidhī, his intent when gathering these narrations were to gather narrations which were athar mustadilla biha. So his intent was to gather narrations that were used as proofs. Now he was to gather narrations which are in and themselves used as proofs. Now, does that make sense, Barakallahu Feekum? Tamam. When he mentions ḥasan al-ṣaḥīḥ, raḥimahullāh, then he intends by way of that the narration where the narrators have the sifat of the narrator, which is ḥasan. So they have the basic sifat that are required from a narrator, that he's not a liar, for example. Naam, he doesn't lie upon the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. He's not the one that lies in the hadith and nas. He's not the individual that is makes egregious errors in narrating. So he has all of those things, and he has the the requirements of the one that is sahih as well. So he has the higher requirement as well. He has good memory. Doesn't have poor memory. Naam. He's not an individual that falls into tadlis, for example, where he may have some deception in his speech. Or he's not an individual that, Allahu A'lam, that doesn't fall into the khawalim al-muru'ah, fall into actions that are not befitting of a carrier of hadith. So this is what Tirmidhī means. He means that the narrators have the base level requirements for a narrator, as well as a higher level requirements mentioned for a narrator. So that's why he mentions Hasan, the base level, Sahih, the higher level. That's what is mentioned by Ibn Rajab when he discusses this terminology of Tirmidhī. Barakallahu fikum. Now, as for this narration, then the narration itself is where, or indicates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentions that whoever revives a piece of land, then it is his property, essentially. So whoever revives a piece of land, then it's his property. Naam. And so, what is intended by revival of the land is that the person could possibly build something upon it. So when we mean revival of the land, what is meant by revival of the land is that a person possibly builds something upon it. So the land is barren, and he builds a building upon it, a house or an apartment building, for example. Now, not any form of building. Or what is understood by the land being revived as well is that he builds a wall around it, so he sections it off. The other intent is that he begins to water it, irrigate it. Likewise, what can be understood from this intent as well is that he sows the seeds upon that land. So he sows the seeds upon that land. Each and every one of these things is the revival of that land. So it's not something which is specific to farming, as understood. Now, it's not something which is specific to farming. So a person reviving the land, he can revive the land in different ways. He can revive the land by way of building something on it. So now that land and whatever's built on it is his property. Or he can revive the land by watering. And if he waters it, then with that as well, whatever comes from it is his land or his property, from his wealth. Or he can sow the seeds on there, and whatever comes from that, the seeds being sown, is part of his property. All of that is regarded as reviving the land. Also, what we understand from reviving the land as well is the removal of trees or stones or anything that has prevented the growth of vegetation on that land. So the land may be barren, but there may be mawāni'. So land is barren, but there are factors which cause it to be barren. So, for example, the land is covered with any rocks, for example. Nothing's going to be able to grow through those rocks. But he takes the action of removing those rocks and stones, and then with that, it makes it easier for things to grow. Or he removes any form of anything that prevents it. Anything that prevents it. So, for example, you may find, for example, trees may be already be on that land. Now the tree is on that land, but the roots, as you find it sometimes with trees, the roots go so far or so deep that they prevent anything else from growing on it. So he removes those trees, for example. Now, this is also something which is from the revival of the land. Now, revival of the land. Then the author goes on to say, وإن حفر فيها بئرا فوصل إلى الماء ملك حريمه وهو 50 ذراعا من كل جانب إن كانت عادية. And so, if now the person upon that land, he digs a well. He digs a well. So this is not necessarily, this is not the land itself, that he's just revived the land, but he's dug a well on that land, which is, regarded as land that is not owned by anyone. Okay? Then he finds water. So he dug for a well and he's found water. So now the well is a functioning well. He owns 50 cubit, or the 50 dhira' from that well, 50 cubits from that well. If now this is regarded as just being in the, this is if it's like was understood to be the ada, like that which is the custom, and that which is the land which there's no claim for it whatsoever. As for where there may be some form of dispute, then he owns 25 cubits, 25 spans from that well. Now, so the point being now is that if he has dug for water in order to build a well, and he strikes water, so the well is now functioning, that constitutes the Iḥyāʻ, the revival of that earth, the revival of that land. Does that make sense, Barakallahu Feekum? So if it doesn't necessarily, as we mentioned, there can be different things that constitute revival of that land. You can build something on it. You can seek to remove things from it that allow things to grow. You can water it, that allows things to grow. You could also sow seeds on it, that of course will allow things to grow. But also you could have the intention of digging a well. Have the intention of digging a well. And then with that, if you strike the water and the well comes and the well starts to function, it's a functioning well, then this now means that you have the reward of reviving that land. Either land now belongs to you. The land now belongs to you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And I believe, inshallah, we'll stop here. Wallahu a'lam. Jazakumullahu khaira. Wa sallallahu wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Barakallahu feekum. Naam, Shaykh.
I mentioned al-Bassām mentioned there's two types.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned the one, I mentioned the second.
No, I think because I went off in the tangent. So the first is the first is what did you mention? Did you mention the first type of land? No one owned the advisor. Then there's the second is where there's a land. There's no obvious owner, but there are remnants of ownership there. There are remnants of ownership there. So there's maybe something that's built upon it. Now, so for example, let's say there's a house on that land, but it's derelict. Now, there's still remnants of an owner. So this is the second type. But then there's the the question could be then, why is it derelict? In this second type of land, that al-Bassām, he mentions, with the second type of land, that there are the remnants of an owner. However, it's not known if there's an owner there. With this, there are two positions amongst Ahl al-Ilm. There are two positions amongst Ahl al-Ilm. One opinion is that if the person revives that land, it is now his property. And this is based upon the narration that we mentioned, the narration of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the narration of Jābirī ibn Abdullah. Then you have the second opinion where it's stated that he doesn't own it, and that the ownership belongs to either a Muslim. We're talking about in the land of the Muslims now. The ownership belongs to either a Muslim or the dhimmi. Who's the dhimmi? The non-Muslim that lives within the non-Muslim land and has the security within that non-Muslim land. So he's either a Muslim or he's a dhimmi, it's a non-Muslim but has a security of being in a non-Muslim land, not security of being in the Muslim land, sorry. Or that land belongs to the Bayt al-Mal. The Bayt al-Mal, which is the treasury of that land. So it's not going to fall outside of one of those three. It's not going to fall outside one of those three. Of course, this is now referring to the land which is in the Muslim, the lands of the Muslims. So if you find some barren land, but there seems to be some degree of ownership, or there was some owner there before. Now it says remnants of an owner being there. It's going to fall into one of those three. Either it belongs to a Muslim, and the owner is a Muslim, so you can't just take it off him. No, because his haqq, his mal is sacred. His wealth is sacred, as we know. The wealth of the Muslim is sacred. Or the second is that it's the dhimmi. So he's non-Muslim, however, he lives in the land of the Muslims, and so he has a degree of protection due to the security that he has living in that land. Or it belongs to the Wali al-Amr, بالأخص Bayt al-Mal, or it belongs to the ruler, specifically the treasury. And so due to that, if there's any remnants of an owner on that land, it cannot now be said that the person builds something on it or does something to it, and now he's revived that land. No, because there is some degree of ownership. So that's the second type of land, and a second call in relation to that. And what's apparent, is that this second opinion is the stronger of the two. So if there's any remnants of an owner to that land, then it cannot now be said that you're reviving that land. Why? Because it has its owner and he's now responsible for it. And he's responsible for reviving it or not. Wallahu alam. Now, barakallahu feekum. Now, jazakallah khair for pointing out. Jazakallah khair. No.
The people who have the other position in regards to that, the land was currently might have a transparency of the owner. They just saying that based on the generality of the hadith.
They say based on the generality of the hadith, yeah. Based on the generality of the hadith, they say that because if you revive the land, then it's your land. Now, it's based on the call. Call. Well, yeah, cool.
But is it permissible for the ruler to force his subjects to sell their land?
Is it permissible for the rulers to force subjects to sell their land? No, because it's the property of the individual. So a person, and this is as a Muslim, that which is from your wealth and your land is from your wealth, is sacred. So it cannot now be forced upon them to give up the wealth. Just as, for example, it can't be forced upon an individual to give up a portion of his wages. As they call it tax these days. Now, or compulsory purchase orders and things like that we have now. No, but it has to be. There still has to be an agreement amongst them. If the ruler commands him, he's to obey the ruler. He has to obey the ruler. No, but it cannot be now forced from him. No, Allah. No, barakallahu feekum. But and it's just similar to you can't now just give part of, or the ruler can't now just take by force a part of a person's wealth or his wages. Hence why this issue of dara'ib, taxation, is one which is the scholars, yani, periodically they will speak against this particular system of taxation because within it is oppression. No, they're taken from the wages of the people, or from the wealth of the people. That you right, yeah. No. If essentially, if you're taking something which is with VAT, Allahu A'lam, because if you've now agreed to pay this particular amount, so you've agreed. Now there's an agreement in that. It's a transaction, isn't it? So let's say, for example, this is going to cost £10 plus VAT, £12. Then you've agreed to pay that. So then there's that agreement there. So it's not, even though it's referred to as a tax, it's not necessarily a tax. Allah Ta'ala knows best. No, it's not necessarily taken in that same manner. No, or forcibly taken from an individual. Well, Allah knows best if that will enter into that. But even the fact that the name is placed upon it is problematic anyway. No. Allah. جزاكم الله خير. بارك الله فيكم إخوان. جزاكم الله خير. صلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
If you want to buy a land, within that region there's a king in that region, and you have to go to the king to purchase the land.
Okay.
But depending on which area you're in, for example, rural area, the king may stipulate within a contract that you can only farm on that land only, even though you purchased it fully, is your land, but within the contract between you and the king, it says you can only use that land for farming only. Now that I suppose the question I'm asking is, now that you've purchased the land is yours, but there's still a contract saying that you can only farm on that land. You can't build a house or anything like that. So what do they really consider that?
To be honest, first and foremost, when a person makes a transaction, the seller cannot stipulate what the buyer does with that purchase. This is something that opposes the conditions of the transaction. So that condition in of itself is batil. Because you can't say, for example, I'm going to sell you this book, and I say you can only read this book on Wednesdays. Now, for example, but it's your book, so it's whatever you, as long as it's permissible, you do whatever you want to do with it. So now, for example, a person sells the land. You cannot now stipulate you can only do this with the land as long as he's doing that which is permissible with the land. Now, where it becomes problematic is if the person now has agreed to that condition. Does it now mean that the person has to adhere to that condition because he's agreed to it? Allah knows best. Allah knows best. Because he's agreed to a condition. So it's possible it could say that he has to adhere to that because he's agreed to the condition. It could also be said that he doesn't have to because there is upon a narration that when the Nabi mentions that any condition that is not found within the Book of Allah is batil. Book of Allah, the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah is batil. And so this a condition such as this would be batil. But a person would possibly err on the side of caution and not break any conditions, especially if he's agreed to it. Allah Ta'ala knows best. Same discussion is around and can be had regarding the aqd nikah, the marriage contract, and the discussion around where you find sometimes the bride or the family of the bride will stipulate. You know what I'm gonna say? No. Will stipulate that the man cannot take another wife. Now stipulate it, make it conditional. Now within that, again, the same discussion can be had, whether because now you are, it could be said that this is a condition which is bartered, or it said that a person has agreed to a condition, so he has to adhere to it. No, it's the same discussion, exact same discussion.
No.
So it's not much of a answer, to be fair, but that's what needs to. Those are the things that need to be considered. That's my point. You have to consider that the condition itself is not a correct condition, but at the same time, you have to consider the fact that you've agreed to the condition. So, do you want to take the risk of breaking an agreement? Those are the things that need to be considered. Those two things. No. I'm not saying you got to tell me the answers.
No.
Those are the things you got.
No, because I have a follow-on question.
Okay.
What if, for example, Tawfiq is the one that owns the land, and now Tawfiq wants to give me the land, but Tawfiq was originally the first person to agree to the contract. But let's say I was involved initially.
Okay, well, because you threw Tawfiq's name in there and he just threw me off.
It's the first person I saw.
I know, but also I'm thinking Ghana, then two threw in Tawfiq and then Khalas. So Tawfiq owns the land, okay?
Yeah.
He owns the land. Okay.
And then it makes it complicated actually using Tawfiq. Let's say the person that owns the land is a family relative.
Okay.
Let's say, for example, a brother, for example.
Yes.
And now the brother wants to give you control of the land, for example.
Wants to give you control of the land.
Control of the land. How?
So
not, let's say, permission of the land. I can have the land, for example. He says I can have the land.
So your brother has the land. He bought it.
He bought it. Yeah.
Now he's saying you can have it.
I can have it. Yeah.
Okay.
But now I don't agree with the terms that the king has made, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with it. Would that still be okay then? Since I wasn't part of the original contract.
Yeah, that's a different contract now.
Okay.
That's a different contract. Because now that contract, let's say, for example, to make it even easier, your brother bought the land, now he's selling the land to you. Yeah? He's bought the land. It's like me saying, I bought the book, now I'm selling the book to you. Now, whatever I sold, the conditions I had with him no longer apply to you. You understand? Because this is the dealing I have with him. Even if the condition was bartered in the first place, it's between me and him. But now I'm selling it to you. That's a whole new contract. Makes sense? No. والله جزاكم الله خير يا إخوة. بارك الله فيكم. وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.